The morning sun had barely broken through the marine layer rolling off the Pacific when the tweet dropped. It was short, furious, and unmistakably from Senator Adam Schiff's verified account. Judge Jeanine is a political hack hiding behind a robe. Her courtroom is a circus, and her rulings are soaked in MAGA bias. She's not a judge. She's a disgrace. Hashtag unfit to serve, the internet exploded. Within minutes, the tweet had racked up hundreds of thousands of likes and comments, sparking a political firestorm that would upend not just Schiff's career, but the very balance of power in Washington. The senator from California, a longtime opponent of President Donald Trump and known for his sharp-tongued criticisms, had just crossed a line that not even his allies were willing to defend. Judge Jeanine Pirro, the federal judge appointed to the newly established Special Oversight Court in Washington, D.C., had become something of a symbol during Trump's second term. After transitioning from her career on Fox News to a judicial appointment, her no-nonsense approach and fiercely patriotic rulings earned her equal parts fear and respect. With J.D. Vance now serving as Trump's vice president, the administration had been moving swiftly through a list of long-sought reforms, many of which passed through Pirro's courtroom. Schiff's tweet wasn't just personal. It was incendiary. And, most importantly, it violated Senate Judiciary Code 42A, a regulation quietly passed under Trump's administration that banned sitting senators from targeting or defaming active federal judges in ongoing legal proceedings. What Schiff had done, knowingly or not, was a direct challenge to a sitting federal judge who was overseeing a politically explosive investigation, an investigation into the alleged misuse of campaign surveillance tools by Democratic lawmakers during Trump's first term. Judge Jeanine was presiding over that case, and Schiff, having been one of the loudest voices pushing the surveillance narrative years ago, was now being summoned to court, not as a witness, but as a potential defendant. "I can't defend that," said Senator Jon Tester bluntly during a press gaggle outside the Capitol. "We all disagree on things, but going after a judge like that, it's reckless." Even more shocking was the statement from Senate Majority Leader Mitch Landry, a Trump ally and a vocal critic of Schiff. "We're initiating an internal review. The senator's conduct is not just unbecoming. It borders on criminal contempt of court. This is unprecedented." Behind closed doors, the White House was reportedly already considering a formal ethics complaint. President Donald Trump, during a hastily arranged press conference outside the West Wing, gave a scathing response. "Adam Schiff is a disgrace. Always has been. Now he's gone after a patriotic judge just for doing her job. And guess what? There are consequences now. Real consequences." Vice President J.D. Vance, standing beside Trump, simply added, "This isn't about politics anymore. It's about law and order." That afternoon, Schiff's office issued a brief statement attempting to clarify his tweet. "Senator Schiff has deep concerns about judicial impartiality in ongoing matters of national interest. His remarks reflect that concern, not a personal attack." But no one was buying it, especially not Judge Jeanine. With characteristic flair, she opened court the next day by reading Schiff's tweet aloud. Her courtroom was packed with reporters, federal agents, legal scholars, and even former Trump cabinet officials, all eager to witness the legal theater unfolding. "This is a federal courtroom," she declared, eyes scanning the gallery. "Not Twitter, not TikTok, not MSNBC. And certainly not a place where senators launch personal attacks to sway justice. This will be dealt with, not on social media, but in the rule of law." The gavel came down. Schiff had just been summoned, personally, to appear before her bench. The headlines the next morning were as explosive as the tweet itself. Schiff subpoenaed, Judge Jeanine strikes back. Senator to face contempt hearing. Removal in play. Trump administration tightens noose on Senate opposition. The moment Adam Schiff stepped into courtroom 4B of the Special Oversight Court, the atmosphere turned electric. Cameras weren't allowed, but artists' renderings flooded social media within minutes. Schiff, typically composed and surgically articulate, looked uncharacteristically rattled. His legal team, a trio of high-powered Beltway attorneys, flanked him, whispering furiously as they approached the bench. Judge Jeanine Pirro was already seated, her iconic glare focused entirely on Schiff, dressed in her traditional black robe with a subtle American flag pin over her left shoulder. She was the embodiment of righteous fury. All rise, the bailiff called. Though the entire courtroom was already holding its collective breath, Pirro began. Senator Schiff, before we proceed with today's hearing, I want it on record that your comments about this court, about me, are not only disgraceful, they are in direct violation of federal judicial code and Senate ethics regulations. Schiff's lead counsel, a former Obama-era DOJ official, interjected. Your Honor, with all due respect, the senator's comments fall under his First Amendment rights. Judge Jeanine didn't let him finish. Spare me the lecture, she snapped. This isn't about free speech. This is about interfering with federal judicial proceedings during an active investigation, one in which Senator Schiff is a material party of interest. His statements were not abstract criticisms. They were targeted, inflammatory attacks designed to intimidate this court. Gasps echoed in the room. Even seasoned reporters seemed stunned. Was Judge Jeanine implying that Schiff had tried to sway the outcome of the investigation against him? Then came the shocker. She reached under the bench and held up a sealed manila envelope. This court has received additional evidence, she said, her voice ice cold. Encrypted communications between staffers in Senator Schiff's office and a political action committee closely tied to multiple media outlets, including a plan to leverage narrative pressure against this court in the event of a subpoena. Schiff's mouth opened slightly. His legal team froze. Judge Pirro continued, This is bordering on obstruction of justice. And let me be clear, if these documents are verified, Senator Schiff will not only face censure, he may face federal charges. Back on Capitol Hill, the implications were immediate and catastrophic for Schiff. House and Senate leaders from both parties scrambled into emergency sessions. Democrats, already fractured from the fallout of the Trump re-election, found themselves unsure of whether to defend Schiff or cut him loose. Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries offered only a vague statement to the press. Senator Schiff is entitled to due process, and we trust the judicial system to operate fairly and transparently. But the damage was done on the conservative side. There was no hesitation. Senator Marjorie Taylor Greene held a press conference just minutes after the hearing ended. Adam Schiff is a disgrace to the Senate, to our Constitution, and to every American who believes in blind justice. He tried to bully a federal judge. Now he must pay the price. At the same time, President Donald Trump tweeted, Told you. Schiff tried to rig the courts just like he tried to rig everything else. This is what happens when you put America first and corruption last. Vice President J.D. Vance echoed the sentiment in an exclusive with Newsmax, stating, This is proof that Trump's reforms were necessary. We finally have judges like Jeanine Pirro who won't cave to elite pressure. Schiff returned to his Senate office later that day, where reporters had already gathered in hordes. The once confident senator didn't make eye contact with them. His team tried to escort him through a private back entrance, but not before a protester outside the Capitol yelled, Traitor to justice! Inside, the mood was somber. Aides were already packing up non-essential documents. Staffers exchanged anxious glances. One mid-level legislative assistant whispered, They're going to throw him out. He's going to be removed. In fact, articles of expulsion were already being drafted behind the scenes. Senator Josh Hawley, in coordination with Trump's legal advisors, began assembling the necessary votes for a formal motion of removal under Article 1, Section 5 of the Constitution, something that hadn't been seriously attempted in the Senate since the Civil War. Judge Pirro, meanwhile, issued a 72-hour deadline for Schiff's legal team to provide a full accounting of all communication between his office and any third-party media outlets or PACs related to the case. Her tone left no room for negotiation. This is no longer just about a tweet, she stated. This is about the sanctity of our legal institutions. And this court will defend that sanctity with every ounce of its authority. By that evening, Schiff's name was trending globally, not for a policy speech or committee hearing, but under hashtags like #Schiffgate and #JusticeForJeanine. Even prominent liberal voices like Bill Maher and Bari Weiss admitted the senator had gone too far this time. Political analysts on CNN debated whether this would be a defining moment for Trump's second term, a moment when the president's war against the deep state found its most dramatic victory yet. One former Biden official remarked anonymously, This is a collapse. We always saw Schiff as the firewall. Now it looks like he's the liability. But for Schiff himself, the worst was yet to come. Because what lay in those encrypted documents would threaten to implicate not just him, but a network of high-powered operatives still embedded deep within the fabric of DC politics. And Judge Jeanine was just getting started. The walls were closing in. Senator Josh Hawley's office was a hive of focused intensity. Drafts of the resolution to expel Adam Schiff from the United States Senate were being finalized. The legal basis wasn't just the inflammatory tweet. It was now tied to the obstruction evidence submitted to Judge Jeanine's court. According to newly surfaced communications, Schiff staff had allegedly attempted to coordinate a smear campaign against the Special Oversight Court itself in a tense committee room 2 floors below. A bipartisan group of senators, including moderates from battleground states, had gathered in secret. Notably, 3 Democrats attended, their faces pale, as they reviewed the encrypted messages and proposed articles of expulsion. The lead clause read, "Whereas Senator Adam Schiff knowingly attempted to undermine an ongoing federal judicial proceeding through public defamation, staff-coordinated narrative manipulation, and extrajudicial intimidation." The language was stark. The consequences were historic. Only 15 senators in U.S. history had ever been expelled, and most during the Civil War. Schiff could be the first since then. A modern-day political excommunication.it was on the steps of the Capitol the following day that Adam Schiff made his first public appearance since his explosive court summons. Cameras swarmed him. Microphones jutted out like bayonets. He stepped up to the podium, red-faced, visibly trembling. Not from fear, but rage. "This is tyranny," he declared. "I criticized a judge, something members of Congress have done for centuries, and now I'm being dragged into court, threatened with criminal charges, and targeted with expulsion because I dared to speak the truth about the Trump regime." He slammed his fist on the podium. "This is not about justice. This is a political hit job led by Trump, Vance, and Judge Jeanine Pirro, who was handpicked not for her legal experience, but for her loyalty to Donald Trump's authoritarian ambitions." There was a stunned pause. Some reporters stood slack-jawed. Others furiously typed. What followed, however, would bury him even deeper. In response to questions, Schiff doubled down, calling Judge Pirro's courtroom a show trial and comparing it to a banana republic tribunal. He then accused the Trump administration of weaponizing the judiciary to crush opposition. Unbeknownst to him, Judge Pirro was watching the press conference live in chambers. Within an hour, her office issued an order. Schiff's contempt hearing would be accelerated to an emergency docket, just 48 hours away. Despite the drama, President Trump remained unusually quiet the next morning. White House insiders suggested the president was told to stand down for strategic purposes. His legal team, including top advisor Stephen Miller and former DOJ official Jeffrey Clark, were reportedly coordinating with congressional Republicans on the messaging front. But Vice President J.D. Vance was not as restrained. During an appearance on Fox and Friends, Vance didn't mince words. Adam Schiff abused his power when he lied about Russia. He abused his power again with the FISA courts. And now he's trying to intimidate a federal judge. If he were anyone else, he'd already be behind bars. When pressed on whether Schiff should be removed, Vance nodded firmly. Yes, and this time, he won't be able to hide behind a committee gavel or CNN appearances. The people see through him now. Back in the Senate, the votes were quietly shifting. Even Democrats like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, known for bucking their party, were signaling support for censure at minimum, and potentially expulsion, depending on what came out at the hearing. In a last-ditch effort, Schiff's team filed an emergency motion to recuse Judge Pirro from the contempt hearing. The motion argued that her personal reputation and media history made her unfit to preside over a case involving someone who had publicly criticized her. The motion was denied within hours. Judge Pirro's written response was blistering. No judge is above scrutiny, but no senator is above the law. Senator Schiff's attempt to recuse this court is yet another thinly veiled act of legal theater meant to delay inevitable accountability. Schiff's political capital was vanishing. Endorsements dried up. His name was quietly removed from several fundraising emails. Former allies like Representative Eric Swalwell and Senator Elizabeth Warren offered only lukewarm support. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted a vague line about judicial reform, but notably did not mention Schiff's name. Inside the Beltway, a new nickname began circulating, Dead Man Walking. Every hour brought a new revelation, a new soundbite, or a new leak. Schiff's former staffers were being subpoenaed. Emails surfaced suggesting coordination with sympathetic journalists to pressure Judge Pirro via public sentiment. And then came the final straw. A whistleblower from Schiff's office leaked a confidential memo to the press, one that showed Schiff had discussed making an example of Judge Pirro weeks before his tweet. That leak destroyed whatever remained of Schiff's credibility as Capitol Hill braced for the hearing. Social media was ablaze. TikTok teens, conservative influencers, mainstream anchors, all had their eyes on what many were calling the trial of the decade. And as Judge Jeanine prepared to deliver what could be a career-ending blow to the California senator, one thing was certain. America had never seen a political reckoning quite like this. When the gavel struck at 9 a.m. sharp, all eyes were on Adam Schiff. The courtroom was standing room only. Federal marshals stood stone-faced at each exit, and journalists sat silently with notepads ready. The tension was not just about the hearing. It was about whether a sitting U.S. senator would be held in criminal contempt and potentially removed from office in disgrace. Judge Jeanine Pirro, firm and unyielding, wasted no time. This court is in session for the matter of Adam Bennett Schiff versus the United States Government Special Oversight Court under Contempt Code 12B and violation of Federal Ethics Statute 48.2. Schiff's lawyers attempted a procedural defense, arguing that the senator's comments were heated rhetoric and protected opinion during a politically charged season. But Judge Jeanine interrupted sharply. "Don't insult the court," she said coldly. "This is not a cable news panel. You're in my courtroom, and here, evidence speaks louder than spin." Then she held up a stack of printed communications, dozens of internal emails and Slack messages from Schiff's office that had been submitted under subpoena. The room went quiet. In one message, a Schiff staffer wrote, "Let's run a corruption in MAGA courts narrative across left-wing platforms this week. We'll tie it to Judge Pirro and rile up the base." Another email was even more damning. It referenced soft threats of judicial scrutiny against Pirro if she pushes the Trump line too far. Schiff leaned forward, hands gripping the table. "This is a smear campaign against me," he said, standing suddenly. "This is all political. There's no justice in this courtroom, just vengeance." But Judge Pirro wasn't having it. "Sit down, Senator Schiff," she ordered. "I will not sit down," he shouted. "This is a disgrace. This is what fascism looks like." There was a gasp from the gallery. Two marshals stepped forward instinctively. Pirro calmly adjusted her glasses and said into the mic, "Let the record show that the defendant is now in contempt in real time for disruptive behavior in a federal hearing." The room was spinning for Schiff. Cameras outside caught the audio feed moments later and broadcast it across every network. Schiff's meltdown was now national news, and for the first time in his storied career, he looked completely unhinged. At diners in Ohio, truck stops in Texas, cafes in Arizona. Americans were watching the hearing live, broadcast on every major network. Even liberal outlets like MSNBC couldn't help but show the footage, if only to try spinning damage control afterward. Polling data leaked later that day showed a stunning shift. Over 58% of likely voters believed Schiff's actions were inappropriate or deeply unethical, including nearly 30% of Democrats. More urgently, over 2/3 of registered independents supported his expulsion. The White House, ever media-savvy under Trump's third campaign-style presidency, released a blistering video compilation across social media, clips of Schiff denying wrongdoing, spliced with images of his staff messages. Then Judge Jeanine calling out his attack on democracy. The video ended with Trump's voice booming, "No one is above the law, not even Adam Schiff." It received 40 million views in under 24 hours. The next day, the motion to expel Senator Adam Schiff was officially introduced on the Senate floor. Senator Josh Hawley, standing beside J.D. Vance in a surprise Capitol visit, read the articles aloud. "Resolved that Senator Adam Schiff be and he hereby is expelled from the United States Senate for acts of contempt, ethical misconduct, and obstruction of judicial authority." Vice President J.D. Vance, presiding over the Senate that day in his constitutional role, looked solemn but firm. "You may proceed with debate," he said. The speeches began. Some were blistering indictments. Others were reluctant defenses, but few argued against the severity of Schiff's conduct. Then came the vote. Final count. 71 in favor, 27 against, 2 abstaining. Adam Schiff was expelled. Gasps and cheers rippled across the nation, depending on which side of the aisle one stood on. Outside the Capitol, pro-Trump demonstrators waved flags and shouted victory slogans. Liberal protesters held signs reading, "This is Trump's court now." Inside, Schiff was escorted by Capitol security, not in cuffs but in humiliation. He didn't speak. He simply walked, head down, through the marble halls he'd once commanded. Senator Adam Schiff's walk down the marble corridor of the Capitol that afternoon was his last as a United States Senator. He didn't make eye contact with the press. He didn't wave. Surrounded by Capitol security, his steps echoed with finality. For all his years of prominence, his leading role in the first Trump impeachment, his high-profile television interviews, and his fiery floor speeches, this moment reduced it all to dust. The Senate floor where he had once stood so proudly now had his name struck from the rolls. Inside his former office, aides boxed up personal belongings. A framed photograph of Schiff shaking hands with President Obama lay face down on a desk. Staffers, some in tears, hugged quietly and handed over secure files to Senate administration officials. Schiff made one final statement to reporters gathered just outside. "History will vindicate me. This is not the end of my voice. It is only the beginning of a greater struggle for truth." But even the mainstream press barely covered his exit live. The real-time focus had already shifted elsewhere, to what this moment meant for American politics, and for President Donald Trump's second term. Later that evening, President Trump addressed the nation from the White House's East Room. Standing at a podium bearing the presidential seal, flanked by Vice President J.D. Vance and Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, the president looked both triumphant and deliberate. "My fellow Americans," Trump began, "today we witness the system work, not a weaponization of justice, but the fulfillment of it. Senator Adam Schiff abused his office. He lied, manipulated, and tried to bully a judge. Today, the Senate said enough. A pause. And to Judge Jeanine Pirro," Trump continued, turning toward the front row where she sat, "You've shown America what courage looks like in a black robe." The crowd erupted into applause. Vice President Vance then stepped forward, calling the moment a victory for judicial independence and American values. Across the country, the reaction was visceral. In conservative strongholds like Florida and Ohio, celebrations broke out in bars and rallies. One man in Daytona held up a sign reading, "Schiff shipped out." Fox News ran wall-to-wall coverage, highlighting Schiff's outbursts and Judge Jeanine's commanding courtroom presence, in progressive enclaves. However, there was shock and outrage. Protests formed in Los Angeles and New York City, some clashing with police. Schiff's expulsion was being painted as a blueprint for silencing dissent under Trump 2.0. But even there, the Democratic base was divided. Progressive strategist Rachel Bidgood said on MSNBC, "Schiff made strategic mistakes. You don't attack a federal judge, especially not one with a national platform." It gave Trump exactly what he needed: a scalp. Even CNN ran a segment titled, "Did Schiff go too far?" The tide had turned. For Judge Jeanine Pirro, the aftermath cemented her as a judicial force, equal parts celebrity and constitutionalist. Legal commentators on both sides admitted her handling of the hearings had been disciplined, razor-sharp, and historically significant. Rumors swirled that Trump may nominate her for the Supreme Court should another seat open. Others speculated she could be offered the role of Attorney General after the midterms. In a rare interview, she said, "This wasn't about me. This was about whether one powerful man could use public platforms to undermine the very idea of blind justice." And the answer was no. Back in California, Schiff returned home to a media circus. His political future was uncertain. Some speculated he'd try for a media role, perhaps a CNN contributor or a book deal exposing what he'd claim were the dark secrets of Trump's America. But whispers inside Democratic circles revealed another truth. Schiff had become a liability. Donors weren't returning calls. Strategists were advising rising stars like Gavin Newsom and Ro Khanna to avoid being photographed with him. Even former allies like Nancy Pelosi stayed silent. He was alone. In an interview days later, Schiff hinted at launching a nonprofit watchdog organization. "We'll expose corruption," he said vaguely, starting at the very top, but few took notice. Historians began writing about the incident in real time. Some saw it as a dangerous precedent, the use of power to silence critics. Others saw it as justice, long overdue and hard-won. Either way, the event would mark a turning point in modern American politics. For Donald Trump, it was a moment of vindication. For Judge Jeanine, it was legacy. And for Adam Schiff, it was the end of one chapter and a very uncertain beginning to the next.